Hi, everyone. We are Miro Consulting, and we are explaining today's topic, which is Amazon Web Services Cost Savings Explained. Now, this will be presented by our COO slash VP of Technical Services, Wayne Federico. Next slide. Now, at any point, if you have questions about any of the webinar topics, feel free to use our Q&A panel at the bottom of the controls panel there on the screen. Questions will be anonymous, and we will field them once all the topics have been presented at the end. Right. Okay, perfect. Now, we are Miro Consulting. Miro Consulting is a leading global provider of software asset management and subscription management services for Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, Adobe, Salesforce, and AWS. We specialize in license management, audit advisory, negotiation tactics, support management, and cloud services. Our mission is to help our clients maximize ROI on their software license and subscription investments, stay in compliance, and negotiate successful contracts and audit settlements. Next slide. And with that announcement, I'm going to hand it over to Wayne to go ahead and present on today's topic. Wayne?
Terrific. Thanks, Stefan. Okay, today's agenda is, as we indicated, Amazon Web Services cost savings. Now, obviously, there are a lot of AWS services that are offered. We can't possibly cover all of them. So where we're focusing on the most common areas where organizations can attain cost savings, that the most organizations can attain cost savings. We'll also touch on some best practices, as well as the AWS tools you have to utilize. So we're going to go into private discounting, public discounting, storage savings, choosing support plans, leveraging AWS tools, and then doing some best practice stuff. So we're going to move on to private discounting. Okay, now AWS, now the reason we call it private discounting is essentially it's something that has to be negotiated. So it's not something that just anybody can get. You have to negotiate it. Now AWS offers the ability to negotiate what they call private pricing addendum or private pricing term agreement, because they call it both, to receive discounting off the total annual spend of AWS services, so off of your entire amount. Now, many organizations want to start taking advantage of moving their IT clouds, the IT solutions to cloud platforms. But honestly, the initial focus can simply be to make sure it works first. So a lot of organizations may start out with just moving development resources over there. So usually it's not a large cloud presence immediately, is usually what we say. And also, you're not required to enter into a PPA agreement in order to purchase and use Amazon Web Services. Plenty of companies, don't have a PPA. And that's mainly because of the fact that you need to spend at least $500K in order to get AWS to enter into such an agreement. And many organizations, like I said, they're just leveraging cloud platform on a more gradual path. So they might have, 100,000, 200,000 annual spend. Now, saving more than 500K and less than 1 million will get an organization an additional maybe 6-7%. So it offers some savings at lower levels, but not a tremendous at the very lower spend levels, because this carries into 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, literally very, very large numbers. It's also important to note that a PPA agreement are for organizations that are dealing directly with AWS and not purchasing AWS services solely through a partner. In those situations, the partner has a relationship with AWS, but the organization does not. And the charges put forth are really from the partner. So any discounting, you'd have to kind of work that out with the partner pricing. So you don't really have a relationship with AWS. And in some cases, people may, that may be where they start. They want to get a particular solution that a partner offers, and they start with just that. And maybe they, move on from there, but that's important to note. Once an organization, now at the same time, once an organization spend levels reach the 500K mark, then you can look to pursue a PPA agreement. So it doesn't mean you're shut out of it. You can wait until you have a spend level that's enough, and then you can enter into that and negotiate that. But it doesn't mean that you can't realize any savings prior to that stage. And that takes us into the next slide. Public discounting. Now, we refer to these options as public discounting since everyone will have the same capability to leverage these methods of discounting. No single one of these 4 plans covers every single set of services offered by AWS. So they have differing pros and cons. You can have any or all of these types of discounts in place, and the system will apply the greatest discount to the instances where the particular plans cover. If no plans are available to cover a particular instance that's in use, then it will revert to charging the standard on-demand pricing. Okay. Now, just to kind of touch on each of these reserved instances, they're one of the first ones that became available. They're based on a commitment of utilization level, and they cover many different technologies and services. They also have a unique ability to be resold if you end up falling out of the required use before the term ends. So let's say you move to different types of servers that aren't covered under reserved instances. There is actually a market where you can put those up for sale for the remaining term that is left. That's unique to reserved instances. Nothing else works like that. Then you've got EC2 instances, savings plans. They require that you utilize instances of the same family and be utilized in the same region. So a little restrictive. And also this one can get you up to 72%, as with the reserved instances can be up to 72% over standard on-demand prices. So that's, that's a big difference than the 6 to 7% on the private, right? We've run into many clients who focus a lot on the private and on the PPA negotiation, and not really ever even kind of enter into this public discounting. And you can get more savings in many instances than you could ever get with PPA. So with the, and there's additional things with the EC2 instance savings plans. You can switch between the Windows and Linux within a covered region. And it's also based on a committed spend amount, which is different than reserved instance, which is a committed utilization. So again, these are these little kind of differences. The compute savings plans are the most flexible. They allow all families, regions, operating systems, or tenancy. You can see the discount is a little lower than the other options, but the flexibility makes it a lot easier to utilize them. In a lot of cases, it might be the only savings plan you have running. Spot instances. They're very particular use, and which is they get a 90% discount, which is great. However, AWS can terminate spot instances with very little notice. So you're never going to utilize it with a production use, really. You would kind of really utilize it with things that are not very important, maybe large batch jobs that are running or something like that, something that can be interrupted and it's not going to be an issue. Now, in our experience, we do run across a lot of clients who are not taking advantage of this public discounting, or if they are, they've not looked at it for a few years because based on what they originally purchased. So since each of these plans has a differing limitation, if the environment changes, right, you kind of maybe shift to different families for whatever reason, somebody makes a decision, you could literally fall out of coverage of your current plan. Now, the AWS system checks hourly to determine what plan the usage falls under, If it doesn't fit under any savings plans that are active, then it's simply going to default to the standard on-demand pricing. So it's real, and what's important to note is that if you were to make a change, the system doesn't spit up a warning. Hey, warning, this is going to affect, you're going to get charged more because you're leaving this family and your plan only supports this other family. You don't get anything like that. You may be able to see it in one of the tools, but you get no kind of notification that you've made a change that's going to affect you. And we have run into clients who have, implemented something years ago, and probably when they implemented it, covered 80, 90% of their environment. But then when we reviewed their environment, they had made changes since then, and those changes were outside the limitations of the active plan they had. So when we looked at things, their plan was literally only taking advantage of maybe like 10% of the environment, not the 80% anymore. And people didn't notice. So it's an interesting setup. It's the good and the bad in the fact that it checks so constantly. And then also with the up to 72%, there's a couple of things that drive that discounting. That's the best possible for, like, let's say the EC2 instance savings plan or the reserved instances. But what also depends upon is the term of the plan, and the terms are 1 or 3 years for everything except for spot instances that doesn't have a term. It's 1 or 3 years, and you can also differ in how you pay. So you could pay it all up front, or you could pay it across the years. So obviously the highest discounts are going to be when you pick the 3-year term and you are paying it all up front. Not everybody can do that, so it'll adjust, but you can still get, it's not inconceivable to get a 40-50% discount, as with some of those other scenarios coming into play. So it's still significant, without a doubt. Okay, we're going to move on. This is the most common one that people really do need to kind of look at. I'm going to shift over to storage savings. Now, storage savings, they don't really amount to a lot, particularly in these environments that are brand new, or particularly developer stuff, because there's not a lot of data up there. So usually when it's a brand new site and they're just starting to kind of, build up that data set, it might be like $1,000, it doesn't add up to a lot. But as your data grows and you move a production solution to it, and the data starts to get more and more and build, what it comes down to is you want to utilize these storage tiers to be able to get more savings. As you can see from the table, you've got the standard, which is what everything is by default at 0.023 cost per GB. And then as you go down, it goes all the way down to Glacier Deep Archive. And the difference between those is essentially how often the data is accessed. There's actually a tool within the AWS system that'll help you with intelligent tiering. So essentially you can set it up so that it'll scan your data and it will determine, okay, when was the last time this data was accessed, and it will drop it into the particular tier. It's also important to note that for the Glacier Deep Archive and these Glacier ones, they're obviously very cheap. So for stuff that is like archive and you only need it in a major emergency, you're paying very little day to day to hold it. But there's other charges that come into play. You have to, for those deeper ones, you have to kind of pay for to access the data, because it's a whole other process. So those are some additional charges, but again, since it's infrequent, it's not really a big deal. So it's not something that people generally have to worry about right out of the gate, but it's something to always keep in the back of your head, because as your data set grows, that S3 standard charge can, begin to build up and begin to be a lot. So it's a key thing. All right. Support plans. Now, support plans, the key with support plans is they're not necessarily offering cost savings per se, but having the wrong one could actually cost your company time or money, in trying to keep stuff up. By default, things are developer support, which developer support gets you about 12 hours response. So it could take up to 12 hours for someone to respond. If you are running production, then you definitely may want to consider shifting to business support. The business support one, because that one would drop, obviously the pricing is a little different, but it will also drop that response time down to like 4 hours. So you get quicker response. Now, if your workload includes mission critical work, you want to get either enterprise on-ramp or enterprise support, and depending on how critical the workloads are, and how much support you actually really need from AWS in those workloads. If you don't really, depend on them very much, you have enough of a team internally, maybe you don't need to go to that level, but it's something you definitely want to kind of pay attention to. Another note in regards to just overall cost is that all of these plans, including this next slide, the enterprise on-ramp, all of these ones are all based on a percentage of the overall AWS spend. So for any other savings you get, like let's say you implement those public discounting and you save like 40%. Well, that 40% brings your whole spend down. So that 3% for your enterprise support is even less, because it's off of, because you're getting those other discounts. So that's why it's important to kind of make sure everything is as cost effective as possible, because you'll save money just from your own support plans. So it's pretty key. Okay, leveraging AWS tools. Now, fortunately, you don't necessarily need to use third-party solutions to be able to gain insights on your AWS usage and learn to optimize it. AWS offers several powerful cost and optimization tools, and we have them listed here. The AWS Cost Explorer is probably the most common one people will use. It shows the environment in a bunch of graphs of the most common costs that organizations track. It is not everything, but it shows the most common things, and you can go in there and get a feel for what things are costing you. You'd be able to see where all of a sudden something's costing you more where you didn't expect it, and maybe you shifted a server out of a plan. That's where you would see that. So that's a very, very useful one. AWS Trusted Advisor. This gives you information that goes beyond cost tracking. So it also helps you understand performance. It'll let you know whether or not if something you're doing is not within the best practices. So it'll guide you on best practices to utilize. Again, you don't have to kind of go with the advice it gives, but it offers it up there, and you have the option to utilize it. Then we have the AWS cost and usage reports, which in and of themselves are not actually a report. They're really a data repository, because it basically, all of the different AWS usage in your environment all comes down to this telemetry and this data that goes into a repository. And it tracks everything, right? Way more than what you're going to see in the AWS Cost Explorer. However, the challenge is you have to actually go into that huge repository and run reports and stuff like that off that data to be able to pull different information out. So it takes some extra effort to try and to utilize it, but it's all there. Also, the repository is not set up to collect the data by default. So you need to initiate it so that it begins pulling and saving that usage info. We have instructions on our website about how to get that set up if you don't have that set up. AWS budgets. This particular tool allows you to set limits on the expected expenditures, so that this way you will get an alert if all of a sudden day 15 in a month you're spending $5,000 and you only expected to spend $5,000 in the entire month, and you're already at $5,000 middle of the month. You could set up things to kind of notify you to be like, hey, something's awry here. You're spending more than you want allocated for your budget to have to pay. So that gives you the ability to kind of jump into the system, take a look, see what's going on, and you can identify whatever the offending service is, make changes to stop or reduce whatever unexpected process is running beyond the normal expectations. So that's valuable to kind of keep things from going out of control, and all of a sudden you end up at the month with a huge bill that you didn't expect.
Wayne, let me jump in there for 1 second. This is Sean Donahue, VP of Marketing at Miro. One thing I just want to point out to everyone is that if you take a look at bullet point 3, the cost and usage reports, it's a really great bit of information, but if you ever dive into it, you're really going to find that it's kind of incomprehensible. It's one of those types of files. It's almost only machine readable. And if you're looking for an option, that's between these sort of DIY, savings on your own, and an option that is less than subscribing to some third-party tool that's going to last long, that's going to be difficult to integrate and cost you extra money. If you're looking to sort of figure out what are like all the ways to find out how I get these options and find these cost savings without me looking myself, Miro has a really useful service here where if you send us the cost and usage report, we can analyze it with proprietary engine that we have. There's no direct connections to your system. And we can sort of pick out where all these different best practices, where you can sort of turn a dial just a little bit and achieve significant cost savings. We typically we typically save our customers anywhere between 30 and 50%. I think our lowest ever was about 35%. So if you're looking for sort of an easy in the middle, that's a little bit more than DIY, but a little less than trying to connect a tool and doing all that third-party stuff, we can really help you out there and help you figure this stuff out. And then with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Wayne.
Thanks, Sean. Yep, that was I was going to chat about that next, but you took care of that for me. But definitely we can help people, and it's pretty common for us to people to feel that, hey, they've got it covered. But then the more curious folks that are kind of like, well, I don't know if we've got it covered. And they hire us, and we end up finding savings. It's just pretty common for us to find savings. No issue. So, okay. Best practices. Now, here we summarize the key areas that should be watching to keep a check on costs. Okay. As we've shown, you should always be looking to take advantage of the public discounting available, because you can save a significant amount of money doing so. You're not restricted to just one type. So if necessary, you can enact more than just one type of plan, right? It's not uncommon for us to see someone activate compute because that covers so much, right? So flexible. And then they have also some reserved instances running for on a plan because of some certain, particular kind of services that are only covered under reserved instances. So not uncommon. But it's key to pick to take advantage of that, because it's actually quite surprising how often we see that people aren't taking advantage of it at all. Next is you want to keep an eye on the newer technologies. AWS makes offers to shift to newer technologies all the time. Often it's at no cost. They will kind of come up with newer types of back-end systems and so forth that you can just shift over very easily, and the higher performing systems actually end up saving you money because they're more efficient. So you can get more done just because they're faster systems. So you can get savings just from that. Also, we've also seen AWS will come out with new plans, new types of plans. The compute savings plans was actually only available for the past like maybe 2 years. The other plans were available further back than that. So that pops up as well. Then you want to also keep an eye on your storage costs. Again, you can utilize the AWS intelligent tiering to help you with that. And again, if you see that it's a big number, then you definitely want to do it because you could definitely save a good amount of money by implementing the tiering system. So it's definitely worthwhile, but just watch as it pops up and starts to grow. Now, the object of don't over provision resources. You really want to deliberately plan which technologies you want to utilize and to enable that allows you to take most advantage of the discounting provided under the public plans. I know some companies sometimes have a policy where they really don't want to impede people, so they want to let people use whatever they need. But if people are just kind of spinning up anything, then it's much more difficult to kind of fully leverage those discounts because they have to fit under the specific plans. So you want to really kind of have that coverage. So, what we recommend to a lot of places too is if you can kind of standardize on what you're utilizing and tell people, hey, by default, utilize this family, in this region, whatever matches your plan, and stick with that. And then only kind of look to do something different, let us know. And then you'll be able to consider, okay, well, maybe this is a one-off scenario where it's only just this one server where we'll just pay on demand pricing. Maybe it's for a temporary period of time. We don't really need to implement a plan. So, there's lots of things like that, but you want to be deliberate because this way it's the most easiest to take advantage of it. And it is pretty common for us to see environments have changed, but people didn't shift with it and their plans aren't being as effective as they could be. Finally, on the eliminate orphaned resources, you always want to keep an eye on, the resources that are active and the services that are active as to whether or not you're using them anymore. Because if you've allocated a service, you are very likely going to continue to get a cost applied to it because you have allocated something, even though you're not using it. It's kind of like forgetting to limit your air conditioning when you go on vacation. You're cooling your house for nobody. So you want to try to avoid that and make sure all of the stuff. And you can see that those type of things are much more easily seen in the AWS Cost Explorer. That one would help you with that, to see those types of things. But you want to keep an eye on those. And that is it. So hopefully this has been informative, and you've picked up on some stuff from this. And we are always available to help if you want to engage us to work something out for you and help you to implement some of this.
All right, thank you, Wayne. We are at our time limit here. We've had a couple of questions, and honestly, a lot of the questions were asked. We have to ask you some questions on how you're running things or what exactly you're doing with the workload. So we don't want to distract everyone here. We're going to get back to you right after this event is over. We'll give you a call and we'll get you some time with our expert AWS analysts who will be able to go through your questions in depth and give you some answers. And as Wayne said, if you were interested in just hitting the easy button and having all your cost savings figured out for you, give us a call. We can take care of that. So that concludes the webinar. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Thank you for everyone who joined us. Thank you, Wayne, for presenting, Stefan, for giving us that great introduction. This ends the webinar. Have a great day.
Thanks.